Several weeks ago, I made a video about SteamOS 3. My only experience with Linux has been using my Steam Deck, but in the process of making a video about SteamOS 3, I ended up making a video about Linux. In all the years that I've been on social media, I have never once received an email that wasn't from like a potential sponsor or someone wanting to send me a product. But after making a video about Linux, I had a lot of people reach out. Things I got wrong, things I mispronounced, things that I could have done better. But one email was from a developer that offered to help me learn more. He was kind enough to jump on a Zoom call with me to help me learn the basics of Linux, answer a lot of the questions that I had. And so this is an interview with someone who actually knows what they're talking about, and sort of a beginner's guide to anyone looking into Linux. For those of you who are experienced Linux users, I would love to hear your thoughts. I'd love this to be a conversation. No single person is the end-all be-all authority. So enjoy and feel free to add to the conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. Do you want to give a quick introduction and background?
Yes, I'm Alex. I'm a software engineer from Mexico who has been involved in Linux as a enthusiast, but professionally and as a hobby since 2007. Mostly a backend developer, which is not exclusive to Linux, but computers has been my thing since always basically, and being a Linux only user since then.
For the end user, your average person that does a little bit of productivity, kind of light hardware use and gaming on their PC, what would your sell be for Linux? Like, what would you say would make Linux the right fit for them, or why they should use that above Windows?
For me, it's basically the opportunity to use your computer on your own terms. Windows comes with a very restrictive license. You need to, for example, Windows 11, that you have to log in and use a Microsoft account in order to use your computer. So the moment, for example, you build a PC from scratch, like a desktop PC, and you need to install Windows on it, it's not really yours anymore because you need to use Microsoft account. You need to go into the ecosystem that Microsoft imposes you, that sets for you. So it really nags you that you have to use Edge, for example. And I'm a really big Firefox user myself. And when I had Windows installed in a computer, an update can revert back to Microsoft Edge. And now with Copilot, it's Copilot everywhere. And if you don't really want it for some reason, which it can be useful, it's a useful tool. You have to deal with it. It's there, occupying space in your hard drive and taking up RAM, which it's your hardware. You bought it, and you're supposed to be able to use whatever you want. So for me, a regular person, anyone who should install Linux in their computers because it gives you the control back to install or not install whatever you want.
Nice. So yeah, I definitely get it on principle. Would you say that the overall user experience is more positive as well?
Yes and no.
Mm,
Yes and no. Yes, because you don't really have like a lot of constant notifications for services that you don't really want. There is also something, well, Windows really is pushing like partnerships with other apps. So you have like Candy Crush, some ads for applications that they recommend that it's more like a sponsorship.
hmm.
So you don't really have that. Except when you use Ubuntu, because Ubuntu wants to monetize. So there was, I don't know if you're aware, but a couple of, well, more like 10 years ago, they have a deal to ship. Amazon has a bookmark on the taskbar, and it's like, and everyone on the Linux community uproared about that because it's not something we're really used to.
Hmm.
But Windows constantly does that, and you don't really have an option. So you have to deal with that. And also no, because unless you plan ahead that you want to run Linux in your computer, you're going to install it in the computer you already have. And nothing guarantees you that the hardware is going to play nice with it. It used to be worse, much worse. Nvidia was a no-go from like 10 years ago. I had then back then when I just started, I have a low old Dell Inspiron laptop, which had back then it was still called ATI, which is a little bit makes me feel old. But those GPU that needed a proprietary driver.
Hmm.
So when you first install it, everyone looked like crap.
Nice.
But
Um,
it it got
I'm
started with the time, so it has been gotten better. But unless you plan ahead, if you're going to build a desktop, you can choose the hardware you want to use. That
mm,
make sure that you plan it plays nicely with Linux.
yeah. No, I'm not gonna ahead of myself a little bit here, just because I was thinking about it with what you were mentioning with Nvidia. Just for some context, for me personally, I'm actually doing a big computer upgrade right now. I had one thing quit and we combined two PCs together, and we're gonna have a PC that we're almost exclusively going to be using for gaming. So I want to get into the whole process of that, but I do also want to ask, because I've heard so much about issues with Nvidia. If I
Yeah,
were to install Windows on my new computer, which I've done before, I'm a weird in between because I'm not completely tech illiterate. I've built my computer, I've installed Windows manually, but I've never really gone beyond that. So for me, I would install Windows, and the first thing I would do is go and download the GeForce Experience in order to get the drivers. Let's
yeah.
say I've just installed Linux on this new computer. What do I do?
All right. First, I will make sure that if the distribution that you want to install includes NVIDIA driver by default. The NVIDIA driver has the particularities of that the license is proprietary. What does this mean? This means that there is no source code that any developer can tweak around. Linux and GNU, which is the other half that not many people mention, moves around the concept of free software. This means that you have the people have the availability to get the source code of with the software itself. So in the case of the NVIDIA driver, this does not happen. So if someone wants to redistribute it with the operating system, in this case, a Linux distribution, they need to have a deal with NVIDIA to make sure that they have the legal right to bundle it with their operating system. So there are some like really orthodox Linux distributions that does not ship any kind of proprietary driver with it, so they won't have like out of the box NVIDIA compatibility with it, like for example Debian and I think like Fedora, which are based in some jurisdictions that prevents them from shipping like lockdown software. But
Hmm.
however, there are like other ones like Pop! OS, which is like from System 76, which is a computer vendor, which they actually sell computers with NVIDIA drivers. So they have like an agreement with NVIDIA to be able to redistribute the driver with their distribution. So I will make sure that first to Google around and look up on your favorite search engine, does not have to be Google, which one has like the ability, either they have the driver installed by default, or they have like the tools to install it easily. For example, I
Okay.
mentioned Debian before. Debian by default, well, they ship only free open source software. They don't really want to mess up with proprietary stuff by default.
Hmm.
But however, they have a separate repository in which they put all the restricted stuff. So you may at the beginning have the ability, or you will struggle a little bit with the hardware compatibility. But if you know what you're doing, you can install it. So if you're going to jump right in, I will recommend that maybe Pop! OS works well because it has everything from the get-go. And then if you start digging more around, maybe you can start playing around with one of the more DIY Linux distributions that need you to install it voluntarily or like consciousness. You have the consciousness what you are installing your system.
Nice. But with something like Pop, it would come out of the box and would be
Yes,
compatible. Nice.
yes. Yeah, it also there's a lot of discussions around because when it comes with licensing and software patents, the US, for example, has the concept of software patents in their law. So many of the distributions that are based in the US have are more tight restrictions on what they can ship with their own distribution. For example, Fedora does not come with the NVIDIA driver by default, but they give you the tools so you can install it separately. And this is because they are subject to US copyright law that prevents them from shipping it. Other
Gotcha.
distributions like Ubuntu, which are based in the Isle of Man in the UK, they have the ability to give you more restricted software during installation, but they don't have it like installed right away. And in
Hmm.
the case of Pop! OS, which is like a software vendor, they have like an agreement with NVIDIA that allows them to ship it. right from the box. You're going to use the live USB. I don't know if you're familiar with that concept, the live USB, the live media that allows you to run the distribution without installing it. So if you run it, I think they ship an ISO with the Nvidia driver pre-enabled by default. So you can test it before install it,
Hmm.
and it will have Nvidia drivers enabled. That's because they sell computers with Nvidia GPUs, so they have like an agreement to distribute the driver with Nvidia.
That's pretty
So
cool.
yeah, it's the nature of the Linux distribution. So everyone has different requirements. So everyone makes different operating system to fit their needs. So System 76, they sell computers with NVIDIA GPUs, so their distribution has NVIDIA drivers by default. And that's nice because it really helps if, in this case, if you build a computer with NVIDIA, you can use that right out of the box.
Nice. So, stepping back a little bit, I wanted to get a little bit broader and talk about one, if someone like myself has never installed Linux before and they have, like myself, doing a computer upgrade, starting up a new system that they've built themselves, where do you go? Where do you get started? And a little bit about what, I guess, define distro as well. Like what makes them all different and in what ways? How are they all Linux, but all these different fragmentations?
Yeah, let's tackle first the distribution question. As I mentioned before, all this, it's not only Linux, actually. There's a lot of projects which move around over the concept of free software. And I know that the term does not really tell you a lot because the word free, especially in English, has the connotation about price, but it's not exactly about price. It usually it's free as in there's a common phrase that tells you it's free as in freedom, not as in free beer. It often is has in free beer has the better kind of beer,
Hmm.
but it's more about having the freedom. There are, and if you look up on fsf.org, which is the Free Software Foundation, which is like an organization that promotes the use of free has in freedom software. The idea is that you have a program that you can also use for whatever purpose you want. So you are not restricted what you use it for. You can start the business with it. You can use it to teach programming to a kid. You can use it in government. You can use it in your business. You can use it in any kind of. You can use it for whatever you want. You can also modify it so you can suit your needs. Suit your needs. It's something that you cannot do with Windows. As we mentioned, Windows ships with a lot of stuff that you can really get rid of, but also you cannot modify Windows if you need to change its functionality for some reason. You cannot get rid of telemetry entirely because you don't have really access to the source code that allows you to do that. But also more importantly, when you receive a copy of free software, you're also allowed to redistribute it so you can help other people. For example, if you download a Linux operating system and then you sell it in your computer, and then your friend wants to build a computer but does not have an operating system to go with it, you can also give him or give them a copy of it so they can also use it. So that's really important. And also the other freedom that you're given with under the Free Software Foundation definition of free software is that also the changes you make, it also can be redistributed. So the concept of free software is really important because this means that everyone has the ability to tweak around the modify to make more performant, to fix issues with the software and redistribute it. And this not only includes the Linux kernel, which Linux it's often used as the entire operating system, but it actually is only the core, the part of the system that handles the memory, that handles the task scheduling, the start the system calls, everything, the core functionality. Above that, there are other projects that build upon the functionality to be able to create files, to modify text files, to compile code, which is really important, which is what the GNU project stands for. GNU, it's kind of fun because it's an acronym that is GNU, not Unix, because us programmers really like our recursivity. So this definition means that it's not Unix, but wanted to replicate the Unix functionality. So that, along with the Linux core, makes like an entire operating system. Now, but going back to distribution, these pieces of software, the core, the the tools that come with it, the graphical user interface that goes on top that allows common people to move their cursor around and click on things. That's another piece. All of that gets packed together, and then it's like distributed as a single package. So that's why there is not a single Linux operating system. You have the Ubuntu, Fedora, Pop, Debian, Red Hat, SUSE, whatever, because these are like the collections of different packages that are released under a free software license that allows them to distribute it to satisfy different needs. So that's why you have the big enterprise now owned by IBM, Red Hat, to be able to provide an enterprise solution based on Linux and GNU and everything. And you have like Debian, which is like that very community-oriented solution that really wants to democratize its development and process in a different way. To summarize, a distribution is like a collection of the Linux kernel, the GNU tools on top of it, different packages that are bundled together to form a complete operating system that you can use in your desktop. So many people will say, and it's like a common meme in Linux groups and Reddit and Matrix and all the channels and Mastodon and all the channels that we use to communicate with each other, that Linux is like it's an OS, but at the same time it isn't, because since Linux is just the core, you can use it in embedded computers. Also, your phone, if you have an Android phone, you're running the Linux kernel, but you don't really have like a Linux OS because it doesn't have like the same tools that you use in your desktop. So it is an operating system, but at the same time it isn't, because you can really interact with the Linux kernel itself. You need to interface through GNU or other tools that help you communicate with it. So if you open a terminal, you have a shell. That shell is also a different program than the Linux kernel.
Nice. So just to recap and make sure I get it, the like Linux itself, you really can't, it's just the core. You can't, like an average user can't do anything with it. You don't have a graphical
Yeah,
interface. You don't have anything that it's not a full operating system on its own that
yeah, it's
anyone.
like the core, like, which is the software that talks to your hardware, but doesn't really
Mm,
talk to you because you don't have
gotcha.
a way to. I don't think you even have like a command line interface if you have like pure Linux. You can also use it in
Okay.
better computers because you will interface through a separate thing. So you can use it, for example, a Raspberry Pi, you can use it to handle like microcontrollers or ECUs in cars because you don't really have like any kind of human interaction. It just fits through sensors and stuff. So you have different interfaces. So the Linux core, it's like the most basic level that you will have that talks to your RAM, it talks to your CPU, it talks to the different I/O that your computer has or any computer has, but doesn't really have any way to talk to you.
That makes sense.
So it's an operating system in that sense.
I had in my head this idea that there was like vanilla Linux, and then all of these distros were like other options, I guess. But knowing
Yeah,
that those build out the core, so Linux is a core, and those build it out into actual operating systems you can use, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah,
How does that work with compatibility? Are most things compatible with all of Linux, or do those distros make it so that it fragments compatibility? Mostly thinking about games, but I guess with other things as well.
yeah. It applies for everything basically. Particularly with Linux, you can have anything that it's like Unix oriented. Usually distributions to ship like binary software, like compile software, you don't like a final executable, they need to package it. So you need to create the binary that it's able to get installed in your system and interact with other packages. So this means that, for example, many Linux distributions come with their own libraries. This allows you to reference certain functionalities from the OS without having it to bundle in your code, the code that you're writing, if you're a developer in this case. So this means that if you want to take that program into another distribution, you have to make sure that it has the same libraries that you're referencing, which is not often not the case because differences in philosophies. For example, you have like the Arch Linux, which is a rolling release, as you mentioned in your SteamOS video, that It constantly updates to new versions as they come. So all the libraries that they ship to provide functionality to programs to use, often they are on their latest versions and may have new functionality. So they may deprecate functionalities that make break or make compatibility with other programs. And you have then on the other side of the spectrum, the Debians, which are like more conservatives on the sense that they want to test and play around and make sure compatibility. But this means that the updates does not come as often you may want. So you have like a program written for the latest version in Arch Linux. You cannot take it and run it in Debian necessarily because you may not have the libraries that you need it for to function properly. So this is why different distributions have different package formats. In the Debian family, the Debian side of Linux, you have the dev packages, which is like all their own solution to be able to pack applications to run in Debian-based applications. And you have the RPM format, which is like the Red Hat slash Fedora, because Fedora and Red Hat, they are like related. So they have their own solution to run applications in a binary format there. And this has been like a common issue in the Linux family for literal decades because there are applications that are designed for a specific distribution. So there are a lot of games. Actually, Steam itself is distributed has an Ubuntu package. It's not even a Debian package, it's an Ubuntu package. And you cannot necessarily take it and run it into Debian because there may be difference in versions of libraries that they need to function. And that dev package won't even run in Red Hat distributions like Fedora, like at all. That's like a consequence of the nature that everything in Linux is like, you have an itch, you scratch it. If you have a solution, you make it. Or different people have different needs. So the enterprise world have different needs. So they have a package designed to satisfy that needs that does not necessarily works. But that's a consequence of being able to freely design the software that satisfies your needs, but has the disadvantage that you have like a multiple solutions to a single problem. And now anyone who does not have like a desire to read up all the different history and the different technicalities, one really is not going to be able to know what to do. So you have a lot of options, but which one is the right for you? And you don't have any idea because you are not an engineer.
Hmm.
Now, more recently, there are solutions for universal packages, especially since the concept of sandboxing has been introduced through the rise of mobile phones. So you have like Flatpaks and Snaps, which are solutions that to package software with their libraries and everything that they need to run, and they will run regardless of the distribution that you're using, which is like a godsend because it's more easier for final users to just grab a flag wrap package and it would run if your computer can run the Flatpak runtime and it would run. Or if you run Snap, if you can run the Snap runtime, it will run. There are also other solutions like AppImage that allows you to have like portable applications that run standalone. Again, since everyone is able to create their own solution, many solutions to a single problem arises. But in the case of games, there are a lot of old games like Unreal Tournament. They had like back in the day, like early 2000s, they had Linux versions, but those versions does not really run anymore because they require libraries which aren't maybe they don't even exist anymore. But now with the Steam, they provide a runtime on which games can run on top of it, and it will make sure that you have certain compatibility with more distributions around.
You said with Steam.
Yeah, with Steam.
So with
Steam, when you
that,
install a game in Steam, it will download a runtime, Steam Linux runtime. There are different versions.
okay.
Yeah, and it will help interface with different Linux distributions, so you have more compatibility with different distributions.
So Steam can help kind of bridge that gap.
Yes, and it has been like a miracle especially if you're a gamer. I'm a big time gamer. I actually went to study computer engineering because I wanted to make games, which I already mentioned that didn't really happen. But when I started playing around with Linux, I basically had to quit playing PC games. I was stuck playing console games because there was no games at all. However, with Steam, they have like Steam runtime, and also more recently with the Proton compatibility layer, it opens the possibility to run way more games than ever before.
Cool. This was a little bit back. What's the difference between Linux and Arch Linux? They're both cores,
Well,
right? Or is Arch Linux something built on top of normal Linux?
Arch Linux is it's a full Linux distribution. So it has a Linux core, and on top of that, other packages that allows you to build an application. What makes Arch Linux special is because when you first install it, if you follow the instructions, you will end up with a really minimum installation. So you can pick any graphical user interface you want. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of the desktop environment. A desktop environment, it's like a collection of applications that help you build a user interface on top of your Linux desktop, or more exactly on top of your Linux installation. So you have Linux has the core that talks to your memory, your CPU, your I/O in general, and then you will have like the GNU tools on top that allows you to have like create directory, change directory, list files in a command line interface. All the basic compilers, if you write a small C program, you can compile it using a GNU tool. And then you will have like the graphical user interface. GNOME is one, KDE Plasma is another one, XFCE another one, that will provide different solutions so you can have like a user interface that allows you to click and drag a window and drag a file from a folder to another. Again, since Linux is about scratching your own itch, different solutions arise. So you don't have, for example, in macOS, you just have the desktop that Apple gives you. This is not the case in Linux. You will have GNOME, which is developed, I think, largely developed by Red Hat. It's a solution. KDE Plasma is another solution using a different kind of technologies on which they build their own user interface. And you can pick and choose. So Arch Linux is a Linux distribution that it's like super modular. So you can pick and choose whatever you want. If you don't want it, you just don't install it. And also has the particularity, and this is one of the advantages. I think Valve picked it up for its SteamOS base. It's that as soon as someone releases a new version of their program, their Arch Linux developers pick it up, compile it, and publish it. So you will have like a stream of updates continuously. You don't really have Arch Linux version 1 and version 2 because there isn't a single version. Updates come as they come continuously. It's a rolling release. This is called.
Gotcha. Okay, that's cool.
So
So, does that mean that Arch Linux is its own distro, or are distros built on top of Arch Linux? So, like you have distros that aren't Arch Linux and some that are? Is that how that works?
it is Arch Linux. It's its own distribution. However, its modular nature makes it so if you want, you can have like no OS. So you can pick it up, customize it, and ship it as a pre-configured package, which your own solution of this is the packages I consider it's my best solution for a desktop solution. So you can have your own operating system based on Arch Linux and the pre-configured packages that you think it's the best solution for your situation.
Gotcha.
So you will
So,
have
some
like Arch-based distributions like Manjaro, SteamOS. It's a distribution that are based on Arch Linux.
So that one is a case where it's more like you can download Arch Linux as vanilla, and then those are additional versions.
Yeah, like
Oh, okay.
derivatives, but they may not be like developed by developers. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's other person who has different needs, any enthusiast, or in the case of Valve, they have their own requirements of what they consider an OS can be. So they will pick Arch Linux has a starting point because it already has the kernel configured, it has already the tools compiled and packaged for its use. So you can have like something completely different suited to your needs.
That makes sense. Okay, cool. So that would it be fair to say that anything running on Arch Linux has the most compatibility?
Yes, but also no. Because why? And I know it's confusing, and it's like the third time that I have say that this. Yes, because they Arch Linux takes everything without the minimal modifications. They compile it and package it and distribute it as is. So for example, has a Linux user, even if you don't run Arch Linux, the Arch Wiki has a lot of information that it's useful for configuration, to set up, to configure, play around, because they don't really modify it a lot. I think the modifications that they do is just to ensure that everything compiles and plays nicely together, but that's it. They won't add or remove functionality as the developer shipped it originally. So this means that if you write a program in Arch Linux, probably it's going to run in other operating systems. However, as I mentioned before, Arch Linux moves really quickly. So they are constantly updating stuff. And other distributions like Debian move more slowly. They are more conservative. They ensure that when someone ships, for example, the program telnet, which is like to connect to a server through an IP address, Debian takes its time to compile it, to test it, to patch any functionality, to do changes so it fits their own philosophy or their vision of what their desktop OS has to be. If you take a program that you wrote on Arch Linux, it may not run on Debian because you don't have those packages ready yet to make use of functionalities that it doesn't exist in Debian, but it may be already exist in Arch. So it may take time for Debian to catch up and have the functionalities that you need in that program that you wrote originally in Arch. I don't know if I'm explaining myself.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, at least as much as it can make sense to someone who's not a developer. Since we talked about how Arch Linux is its own distro and it can be built upon, does Arch Linux support Nvidia drivers?
They have binaries that you can install. However, if I recall correctly, it does not come by default. If you follow the minimal installation guide, you want to have NVIDIA drivers installed.
Hmm.
But they have it in their repository, if I recall correctly. Let me look it up really quickly. Um, or they will have it a really easy way to install it. My suggestion for anyone who have like NVIDIA GPU installed already, I avoid NVIDIA. AMD plays more nicely with Linux in general, so pretty much any AMD GPUs are plug and play, basically.
Why is that?
But
Does the company just more, are they just more friendly towards Linux in general?
they are also really like free software, open source friendly. So their drivers are actually embedded into the Linux kernel right off from the get-go. So you don't really need to install any other binary on top of it. It's already on the Linux kernel right out of the bat. They have some extra functionalities that they keep behind their paywall. So there are some really special use cases on which you need to install a binary from AMD. But for general use, it is not really necessary. However, NVIDIA, since they have like a really special position in their gaming market, so they probably have some special sauce, some secret sauce hidden in their drivers that they don't really want to disclose publicly. So they keep it for themselves and they only distribute a binary package that some Linux distributions are able to have in their repositories, which is something that maybe needs to be displayed separately, what it's a repository. Or some others have like a separate place on which they can put it and make it like it's not officially part of the operating system, but you can have it here if you need it. Wink, wink. For example, Debian has like a really strict guideline of what they consider a free open source applications. So it's actually more strict than any other definitions like the open source initiative. So they have like their repository, which is like a server on which they put the binaries executables that you can grab and install in your system. In the same way, like in a similar fashion, like the Play Store is like a place on which you can download applications. A repository is the same. So if you build your operating system, you have a server on which you compile applications and put it there so all users can grab it and install it in their systems. That's a repository in a nutshell. So some distributions are able, as I mentioned before, due to licensing or copyright or whatever restrictions, or they maybe are not able to put it in their official repositories, but they may have secondary third-party repositories on which other people can put drivers like NVIDIA drivers or other packages that they are not allowed to distribute. As I mentioned, if you go to wiki.archlinux.org, you can look up NVIDIA and you will have like the steps to install the NVIDIA drivers in your Arch Linux system. So they apparently have third-party and the Arch user repository, which is a really common tool to use in Arch. I'm not an Arch Linux user myself. I'm usually in this call through Fedora. I'm more a Fedora fan.
Why is Fedora your pick of choice?
I really admire Arch Linux like rolling approach. However, I had like not the best experience with it. Before using Fedora, I used OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, which is like the rolling approach to updates. However, sometimes when updates come too quickly, sometimes there are some friction between packages. And as I mentioned before, each package is developed independently. It's not like a single company directing put in the direction of the operating system. So it's like a collection of smaller projects put together. So when you have like a very constant influx of updates, some issues may arise. So I like the approach of Arch Linux that it's like constantly updated, but it's not something that I use myself because I prefer more like more slower approach. Fedora updates every 6 months, and they have a new version.
Hmm.
So I'm usually using the newest packages available. But once you get it, you don't really have updates unless it's like a security patch or something more critical.
Hmm.
It will be updated 6 months ahead after the Fedora developers have tested it and played around with. It had like a beta period, and they will have like some time to test it before it ships to the users. So that's why I'm using Fedora. It's like it's up to date, but it's not like on the bleeding edge like Arch Linux is.
That makes
So
sense.
it's so the are more like gate kept before it ships around. So that's why I'm
Now,
a Fedora.
I'm assuming that if you're running Arch Linux, you get to choose when you update, though, right? It's not just automatically updating in the background like Windows.
No, yeah, that's a really nice thing. It's that it won't nag you that you have to restart because it installs stuff without asking you. So you can actually install like graphical applications to notify you when you have updates. But people often do not install those because they don't really want to know or they don't really care if there are updates right off the get-go.
Hmm.
But when you run a rolling distribution, it makes you really get used to constantly open the terminal and check manually if you have updates because
Mm.
you just can install it whenever you want. And
Hmm.
also often updates don't really ask you to restart your computer
That's
because
nice.
they can be installed without restarting. So
Hmm.
many people, and also updates are free of charge. So it's not like Mac OS back in the day that charge you a fee to install an update.
Hmm.
You just can install it or not install it if you want. But
Nice.
I will recommend that if you have a rolling release, do not let a lot of time pass before installing. Because if the jump between versions is too big, you may have compatibility issues sometimes.
Oh, okay.
Some configuration files, because it's really common in the Unix philosophy that you have text files to configure some certain parameters of the applications. If you jump from just keep too many versions, you may have some compatibility issues because some configuration file may have changed since. Some package managers will tell you that, hey, this package has a new configuration file. Do you want to keep the one that you have, or do you want to download a recommended one? In the case of Ubuntu and Debian, it asks you that. I'm not sure if Arch Linux makes the same. Probably it does. I'm not really sure. But you have to know what you're doing. If not, you're going to end up like Linus from Linus Tech Tips, which he wanted to install Steam and he ended up with no user interface because
Ah,
because actually I think that whatever he was installing, the package manager told him, if you install this, you're going to break your system. And he did not read that. So Sometimes it happens when you're on a rolling release, it may be attractive because you can install whenever you want. But in my experience, which may or not happen to you, your mileage may vary. If you wait too much time to install updates, you may have run into compatibility issues.
Okay. Now that makes sense. So you kind of get that trade-off, whereas with you updating Fedora every 6 months, everything's tested and you know that there won't be any issues with that.
Yeah. And other
Okay.
distributions like Debian, they wait even longer to make releases. Debian comes around approximately every 2 years.
Wow.
So the packages that they ship to the state to their final, I think the next version of Debian is Debian 13.
Hmm.
It has been tested for 2 years. So they have like different repositories that you can like different update channels, if you want to call them like that. You have the stable, the testing, and unstable. And they follow the similar approach to Arch in unstable, on which they ship anything as soon as it has been released. They put it on stable. After some time, when people have been tracking that update channel on stable, they give their approval to move it into testing. Everything that will form the next Debian version goes into testing. You can track testing if you want to help to test the next Debian release. And then finally, what they actually call a Debian release comes in stable approximately every 2 years. But when you get it, it has been tested for 2 years by volunteers all around the world, which I believe it's like super cool.
That's really
So
cool.
I have like a super old MacBook. I think it's like a 2008 MacBook with an Intel Core 2 Duo, which many people those just threw those away because it won't update. I think if you have like macOS, there is not a single web browser that runs on that old version of macOS.
Mm.
However, I installed Debian on it, and Debian is like has been tested. So when it comes to old machines, you can really have like a really rock solid solution if you install Debian on it.
No, that's cool. Shoot, yeah. That makes I'm already feeling way like I have the ground beneath my feet now. Um, let's
Yeah,
talk
Linux is a
about
microcosmos on its own, so I understand that there's a lot of terminology really specific to open source and free software and everything, the philosophy. There's a lot of debates because when it comes to, there's a lot of people that says that open source is a technical marvel, but also there are more like hardcore purists that will say that this is a philosophical and ethical purpose that you have to be able to control your computer, be able to use your solutions and help other people with software. I'm personally a bit on that front,
mm-hmm,
but I understand that it's like overwhelming because there is a lot of stuff going around, and I can talk for hours about this.
mm-hmm. Let's talk about Proton because I understand what Proton does. I've watched some videos and I understand how I saw one video that gave a very nice analogy of like your folder system is a library and it translates where the titles of the books are so you can find things. That sort of analogy. What I don't understand is does Proton do everything automatically? I'm assuming it only comes with certain distros, and then on other ones you'd have to install it separately. And then let's say I downloaded a distro that has Nvidia support. So I'm thinking my own system right now, and I get a distro that has Nvidia support, start it up, install Steam. If I download a game, um, do I need to do something with Proton in order to use Proton to translate something?
Proton is a Valve technology. It has been in-house developed by Valve. It is based in something called Wine. Wine is an acronym for Wine is not an emulator, again, recursive acronyms because we love
Hmm.
that thing in
Oh yeah.
programming. Wine is something called a compatibility layer. It's not exactly like, for example, DOSBox or DocStation or PCSX2, which are emulators for other systems that allows you to run software developed for that into your computer, which is a completely different platform. A compatibility layer, what it does, it provides the minimum interface. So a program written for Windows can have its system calls translated into system calls that Linux and GNU can understand. So Valve has been like sponsoring the wine development lately, and they have like their own remix to play around with Steam Windows games. So if you want to install it, you just have to install a game from Steam that it has been compiled for Windows.
Okay.
There is a when you have like your Steam instance running in your Linux computer, you can right click in a game that it's like it also is going to be like grayed out because it's not like native Linux game. But you can right click on it and go to I think manage and go to a section called compatibility in which you can enable Proton.
Okay. So you
And it
enable
will
Proton in Steam?
and Steam, yes. It does not.
Okay.
I think there are like other versions that exist outside of Steam, like Glorious Eggroll is one that it's like a another. Thankfully, Valve made Proton open source and free software, so
Mm-hmm.
people can pick it up with source code, modify it, tweak it around, and repackage it into something else. One of these is like Proton Glorious Eggroll. I think Glorious Eggroll is the username of the person who has been tweaking around to make it sure that it has like compatibility for other games that are not like considered originally by Valve. But Proton on its own lives inside of Steam for Linux. So if you
Okay.
you want to get it, you have to enable it for the game that you're running.
Okay. But you
So
do that all within Steam. You don't have to also,
you don't necessarily want to get it externally and configure it. You can if you
mm-hmm.
wish, but
Okay.
it's not like necessarily for any solution
So
for your particular use case.
did Valve develop Proton from Wine? Is that how that worked? Or
Yes.
okay, so
Wine is another
Valve made Proton, it's integrated into Steam, but
yeah
Wine is the underlying thing that
technology.
they okay.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of
And
sense
wine
too.
has been around like for 20 years or more. I usually when I say that I renounce like PC gaming when I moved into Linux originally, it's not entirely true because I played a lot of StarCraft Brood War through Wine in my Linux install. It was the only game that I got managed to run in my computer, and that's pretty much the only thing I was able to play for many years. But Wine also allows you to install some versions of Photoshop or Microsoft Office into Linux
Okay.
versions. I don't really recommend it. I will suggest that if you're dipping into Linux for the first time, try to use free software
Mm.
applications that
Mm-hmm.
may cover the use cases that you may need. For example, if you want to use Microsoft Office, maybe you can try LibreOffice, which is a free open source solution to the Microsoft suite. It's different, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There are many functionalities that are different, so maybe it's not really suitable for your needs, but it may provide a solution in the meantime.
Mm-hmm.
So abstain to trying to use Wine right from the get-go because Wine is more trickier to get running and it may not be suitable for the application that is specific application that you want to use.
Mm. So
So yeah,
Proton is
both,
used for games only because it's through
yeah,
Steam, developed by Valve, and then Wine, in theory, can be used with any other Windows program, but it may or may not work.
yeah. And really useful is that if you go to winehq.org, I think if I recall correctly, it's like they have like a database web page on which you can look up for different games or programs that you may want to run, and they have volunteer submitted reports on which people tell you that this one works, the one may work, but you need to play around with some configuration, or you need to do this in order to get it running, or they will tell you that this not is not working. Try
Mm.
again later.
I am unfortunately tied to one of the most evil companies. Until I can run Adobe products on a Linux operating system, my productivity computer, I don't think can ever run on Linux. Gaming, I can't wait to get away from Windows, and I that's why I'm talking about this hypothetical one that we're building shortly. But I can imagine Adobe just has things too locked down, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, and I think they have like a really tight grip in the entire business because in my university, which I believe it's going to be like the case in 99.9 of institutions that teach any kind of professional grade like editing or architectural or in my case engineering, they
Mm-hmm.
will be tied to certain applications. So they once you graduate, you go into the industry and they also have those tools.
Yep.
My recommendation is that maybe try it again in a separate computer on which you can play around. For example, if you do like image editing, like graphical design and all this stuff, you can install the GNU image manipulation program, also
Mm.
known as GIMP,
Oh, I have
which
heard of
is
that. Yeah.
many people put it as like as Photoshop like replacement
Hmm.
or like a Photoshop alternative. I wouldn't say it's like alternative. It's its own thing. It has its own menus. It has its own idiosyncrasies, like its own solutions. But it's also a program to manipulate images. So it's different. It's not Photoshop. It
Hmm.
will never be Photoshop. It won't work like Photoshop. It's its own thing. It has its own concept, but it will be able to do some things. There are some YouTubers in the Linux world that do their thumbnails with it, so it works. If you do like CorelDRAW, you have Inkscape, so you can. There are some things that you will need to relearn for it. Create them for the digital drawings. What DaVinci Resolve, which is for video editing, has a
Hmm.
Linux binary, but there are also KDN Live. So people have the need to edit, to do creative work on Linux, and so
Hmm.
solutions have arise. But do not expect them to behave like the ones that you're used to. It's other thing, definitely made by different people with different needs, but
Hmm.
has the ability that it's easy to distribute. So, for example, if you need to make some image editing like really quickly, you can go to GIMP's homepage and download it and use it. If
Hmm.
you know someone who has the need to make some quick edits but don't really want to pay or can't pay for Photoshop,
Hmm.
they can use that, and you can use it to help someone who needs it. And I think it's like the nice part of Linux. I came into this like in a technical sense because I wanted to make use of my computer, but I ended up staying by the social um, goodwill, humanitarian that, hey, people need to do computing.
Hmm.
Let's help them make computing.
Yeah, no, that's always been a thing that I have understood about Linux. I've always respected what it stood for and the principles of it. And so trying to actually dip my toes in and get to actually know it is a very different situation. And I think a lot of what I've been talking about in these YouTube videos, and I'm actually working on an additional follow-up to that right now. Basically, the way I see it, I just like your thoughts on this, is that SteamOS, which is based on Arch Linux, can basically bring Linux to people that don't understand any of this.
Yeah,
The idea of systems that will be shipping for people that just want to play games and absolutely nothing else, they don't have to learn any of this in order to suddenly be Linux users and to expand
yeah,
that out.
yeah. Many of the reasons why not many people use Linux or even heard of it initially is because it does not come with your computer.
Hmm.
Not, I think people who install their own operating systems are in the minority by much. Many people just go walk to Walmart, pick a computer, bring it home, open it up, and use whatever it came with. So the idea of having like a device running Linux out of the box, it's like super exciting because more people are going to be using Linux and they may not even realize it. But also, it's not like the Linux of Android, which is like super locked down behind a lot of stuff that Google puts in behind locked bootloaders and all that stuff that prevents you from tweaking around if you really want to, which is possible, but it's harder.
Hmm.
Luckily, Valve is like a super geek company, and I'm not really a big fan of cheering up for companies because in the end, what they want is to make money. Their main interest is to make money. They are not there for like helping people. That's a role for charities or people in general.
Hmm.
But Valve, it's like Gabe Newell is like a really nerd at heart, so they are given the possibility. They're making a desktop mode for SteamOS, so
Hmm.
they didn't really have to, but they are going to. They are doing that, so that's super exciting.
I agree. I literally in the newest video that I have scripted out, I have a line talking about how Like, I am personally really excited for SteamOS, and I want Valve to realize their dream of Steam machines. And the video that's coming out soon is going to be like a lot about the failure of the original ones because
Mm,
I love
it
going
was
back on because I was pretty in tune with it when it was happening. I was pretty young, but I was like aware that, oh man, Steam machines are coming. This could be really cool. This is going to disrupt the console industry. And then,
tell that to me. I was already a big Linux fan. I was around like 2014, I
hmm
believe.
hmm
So I was already neck with deep into Linux. So having the idea of being able to buy a console running Debian, which was my distribution back then, it was like super exciting.
hmm
However, it was super early. There was not a lot of stuff. I think Valve realized that they needed a more like a way to play existing libraries
hmm
into their computers because developers were not like super into the idea of having to rebuild their games for Linux compatibility
hmm
because the market was already too small. And that always has been an issue with Linux software in general is that the market share is small, so companies
hmm
don't develop for it. But since common applications are not available in Linux, they the market share won't grow.
And that's
So
one of the things because yeah, I want Valve to succeed in this, even though they're a company that doesn't actually care about you, they are still a huge profitable company. And
yeah,
so being a cheerleader for a company is never
yeah,
necessary or helpful or
yeah.
whatever. The reason that I am excited for it is that I would love to see the people that are going out and buying a computer that's just for games, or even taking in some of the console market. I would love on the Steam hardware survey in 5 years to show that 25%, maybe even 10%
Even 10, it
of
will be
Steam
huge.
users are on whether it be SteamOS or other forms of Linux. The reason that I want Valve to succeed simply is I want Linux to be a percentage of the user base that they are serious competition for Microsoft and I guess Apple to some degree, and OS
To
makers.
some degree. Yeah.
Yeah.
And even if the open nature and free software principles of Linux and GNU and all those things related to that sphere, the more people use it and the more companies embrace it will mean that more people can benefit of it. Because
hmm
those improvements, those changes go back to the public. So I always remember that back in the day when I just first started, it was like super complicated to get a printer going because Linux was such a small niche. And now there are more companies who use it internally, also a lot of universities and everywhere. It just means that you can pick up a printer, just plug it in, and it's going to work like right off the gate. And now also with Steam, they have like a really tight integration with hardware makers, with AMD, with Nvidia. So it's more likely that in the future, if this goes big, we will have better hardware with ready drivers to use with under Linux. And this means that we can use our computer in our terms because we are not tied to the Microsoft end user license agreement, or in the case of macOS, which on which you can get it if you don't have a Mac computer.
hmm
So it's going to be huge for computing in general because it's going to make our lives easier and it will make, especially in these times on which there is a lot of push for subscription services, for games as a service, everything has a service, being able to run a software that it's like local in your computer, it's not nagging you to use an AI companion or has ads or whatever. It's like
hmm
super important.
Yeah. That's the biggest thing at the end of the day is I'm watching this and I'm excited because even I have never once used Linux personally, but as a non-Linux user, I am really excited for Linux to have greater market share. I want to see it be successful because it it's best for everyone.
It is. What I will recommend you, especially since you mentioned that you have like your main source of income or your livelihood depends on specific tools. If you can grab like an older ThinkPad from eBay and you can
Mm-hmm.
install it there.
Yeah,
Everyone in the Linux spheres loves ThinkPads and
I'm sure.
play around with applications that may do what you do, like editing stuff and playing doing creative work,
Mm-hmm.
but don't do it in your main rig because your life depends on it. So
Yeah.
don't disturb that. Keep it as it is, but
Mm-hmm.
have secondary one in which you can learn new things. And
Mm-hmm.
also, it does not hurt to always learn new stuff.
Agreed.
Or buy a Raspberry Pi,
Mm-hmm.
um, because they have like an already Linux system going and it will work. And you can. The goal of those kind of computers is to tinker around, so you can learn a lot of things there. And even if you don't plan to be a developer, a nice thing about Linux is that since you have the access to the code and the ability to tweak it and play around, even if you're not a developer, you may know a developer. So you can tell your programming oriented friend that, hey, I give you $500, but do this to me. Help me with this.
Mm-hmm.
So help your local developer
Yeah.
with some work there. Or you can have, even if you're going bigger, you can hire some professional company to consult you. So you have like the ability, if even if you're not a developer, it helps. Free software helps people even if they're not developers.
I'd love that. No, I really appreciate you reaching out in the first place. I appreciate everything that this is all stuff that obviously if I watched enough YouTube videos, if I, did enough searching, I could learn it. But everything that you have explained to me today has gotten me from point A to point B much faster.
Yeah, it's a good thing that there are a lot of content creators now doing a lot of stuff. Learn Linux TV, it's a really good one. It's a really one. It's one that I enjoy a lot. Back in my day, back in 2007, 2008, when I just started, it was all discussion forums, like super old school style discussion forums. A
Hmm.
lot of reading in wikis and discussion boards, everything. So now we have a lot of options when it comes to videos, and we are also making stuff from a different approach.
No, I really appreciate that. Just you giving your time to that and all. Just out of curiosity, I've found this whole thing a little bit funny because my YouTube channel has gone through a lot of different phases, and I don't normally take on because when I first set out, it was just I know that I like the Steam Deck interface. Therefore, I'm excited for the possibility of Steam Deck interface on other things. And so I jumped into making this video that was fundamentally about Linux. I made, I did some quick Googling and added some facts and things that I got stuff wrong and all these things. This is the first time that I think my channel has dove into something this in depth. So I'm wanting to use this as an educational experience. And I also, my video is the first one to come up when you search SteamOS 3 right now. I would like to release more stuff that is perhaps more accurate, more knowledgeable, and, So
Yeah,
I'm looking
no,
forward
yeah,
to seeing where this takes my channel overall, because I've always just done all sorts of tech. I started my channel when I was working at AT&T, so it was all like mobile tech. It was everything from
yeah,
here I have access to 500 cases, which are my favorite cases. And looking at that compared to what I'm making now seems like a million years away,
yeah,
but it's all tech. It's like it's all
yeah,
in theme technically, but I
yeah. Tech
have a
is,
feeling that this video with the amount of people that have been interested in it will probably be another major shift for my channel. And so I just want to know what I'm talking about, I guess.
yeah, I understand it. There's a lot of videos of my Linux journey. Switched to Linux for 30 days, and this is what
Hmm.
happened. There is a lot. Also, people are looking for alternatives. I think it's part like my Windows is annoying, but also
Hmm.
there is a lot of this defies status quo, and that's
Yep.
exciting.
Hmm.
So yeah, I understand that it's a lot of hype, and personally, since I've been the one who has been like the old guy in a hill, exiled from society, using Linux from a while. Everyone in my university was like, "Why are you like struggling like that?" And I was like, because it's fun. It's
Hmm.
fun. It's something different, and I believe it's good, and I
Yeah.
think people should try it. And this is exciting because more people are looking into it, and I'm all for it.
Yeah. No, I think the future is quite bright. Are there any social medias you'd want to plug or anything like that?
I've been delaying for a while getting into streaming myself, but in the meantime, you can find me on mastodon.online/AlexMax90, which is my username pretty much everywhere. So probably I'm going to pop up with some other identity in the future. Not really sure which one yet, but I repost there a lot of memes related to technology and lefty politics and stuff in general that caught my attention. And that it's another topic maybe for another day. Mastodon and decentralized social media. It's another
Perfect.
iceberg. So, but yeah, you can find me there if you wish.
Sounds good. Well, yeah, thank you again for your time. Email me all the links to your stuff and any updates that you do in the future. Um,
Alrighty.
and I'll
All,
keep in touch. If I get to the point where I'm installing stuff, I'll probably reach out, and I
yeah, hit
appreciate
me
you
up.
very
We can
much.
have a video call and we can all play around and I can guide you a little bit with my experience. I'm not like the most knowledgeable guy in the universe, but I really like this stuff.
You seem like an excellent resource to me, so unless you're making everything up, you seem pretty on top of it.
I'm not a generative AI, so I'm not
Yeah.
hallucinating.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. You have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye.